This is the face of the most wanted scammer on the planet, Bulgarian national Ruja Ignatova, dubbed the Crypto Queen. From late 2014 until 2017, she operated as the chief executive officer of a Ponzi scheme that managed to steal over $4 billion from investors. The rise was meteoric, the scam was obvious, and the fall was fast, and yet this story's still ongoing even half a decade after arrests were made and the company allegedly was shut down. You see, one day in late 2017, and coincidentally right before authorities were making their move, Ruja Ignatova mysteriously vanished without a trace.
Takes a Ryanair flight from Sofia in Bulgaria to Athens, Greece, and hasn't been seen since.
It wasn't until she disappeared that this investigation really got crazy. I'm talking diplomatic immunity, terrorism, links to some of the most wealthy and powerful people on the planet, the largest Bitcoin transaction in history, and the potential for her disappearance to have started as an escape from consequences and ended in an assassination. But of course, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the very start. It is said that a tiger cannot change its stripes, and yet in the burgeoning world of cryptocurrency, the tigers are very often given the benefit of the doubt. Whether this is by ignorance, negligence, or something else entirely, people often ignore the warning signs.
And to everybody who tells me that I violate the philosophy of cryptocurrency, guys, we are a bigger community. We decide what the philosophy of cryptocurrency is. If you have 1,000 coins on your account and 1,000 in the mining, we will double the coins on your account.
Ruja Ignatova, much like other criminals, did not graduate from a regular life into the life of a multi-billion-dollar scam without prior experience. You could say that she was born into this. Ruja and her family emigrated from Bulgaria to Germany when she was 10 years old, and in 2005, she earned a PhD in private international law from the University of Constance. After working for a handful of years at a company recognized as one of the largest management consulting businesses in the world, McKinsey & Company, Ruja decided it was time to strike out on her own, or rather, with her family. This was the start of her recorded criminal history, although if I did have to guess, there was probably some other stuff before here. In 2012, she was convicted of fraud along with her father, Plamen. This was in connection with their acquisition of a company that very shortly afterwards was declared bankrupt in very dubious circumstances. She was given a slap on the wrist for this offence, just a suspended sentence of 14 months imprisonment. And of course, a slap on the wrist did nothing to dissuade her from chasing ill-gotten gains, and thus she went to the industry where consequences were somewhat of a distant worry: cryptocurrency. Just 1 year after being convicted of fraud, Ruja was involved in a Ponzi scheme called Bitcoin. We can look at Bitcoin as an alpha or a beta test for what comes next. If I had to guess, Bitcoin was called as such to capitalize on Google searches for people who misheard others speaking of Bitcoin. They copied the aesthetic of Bitcoin and they launched in Hong Kong by a national named John Ng. This project had a who's who of small-time scammers attached from the very beginning, a company called Prosper Inc., which was another Hong Kong-based company that sold packages for, quote, digital education, but of course now with partnered offers for Bitcoin. Ruja Ignatova herself, who wasn't really known at the time, and Nigel Allen, who ran a worldwide fraud called Brilliant Carbon, where you could purchase eco-plans claiming to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, but of course didn't. The actual business model of Brilliant Carbon was that as a Brilliant Footprint affiliate, you could of course recruit other affiliates and be paid commission, which then paid you a commission on the sales of your recruits and their recruits, a pyramid scheme, plain and simple. Now that you have the scammers assembled just like the Avengers, what exactly were they doing with Bitcoin? How would it operate? Well, they sold you packages for between $300 and $5,000, and they would generate you, as an investor, an absolutely insane return. Though of course your returns would not be in the same currency you bought in at. It wouldn't be in dollars. It would be in a make-believe asset that you couldn't interact with in any way at all. The reason you couldn't interact is because they were not cryptocurrencies. The difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin is that Bitcoin was centralized and Bitcoin is decentralized. You can see why they chose this name now with me repeating this. Now, why does decentralized versus centralized matter in this context? Well, with Bitcoin, if you were to buy the asset, you could move it pretty much anywhere you wanted to and do whatever you liked. Move it to your own wallet that is in your control, trade it to a friend, sell it on an exchange, buy things with it, whatever. With Bitcoin, it just existed on their servers. No technology was involved at all, and thus it was entirely worthless. And people were starting to recognize this, so Bitcoin's executives got together and decided on their best course of action. They put together a press conference declaring that they would instead create a public share offering. This share offering, however, was going to be unregistered. Being unregistered essentially means you have very few protections and no one is given it the stamp of approval. You are most likely going to lose your money if you are investing in unregistered shares. And who gave this press conference? Well, none other than Ruja Ignatova herself, claiming you could take your worthless Bitcoins and turn them into the stock of the business. This was announced in July of 2014 as an attempt to stem the bleeding. It of course didn't work, and by August of 2014, Bitcoin was on the verge of collapse, and they did what any self-respecting scammer would do. They created another cryptocurrency, this time called BNA. Yet again though, it wasn't a real cryptocurrency. They were actually too lazy to press a few buttons and make a fully functioning one, instead opting to yet again just pretend this existed on their servers and tell you that the only way to trade it was using their internal exchange, known simply as the Cools DAC. Unsurprisingly, this also didn't work, and at this stage the leadership was starting to defect. After stealing countless millions of dollars from a predominantly Chinese affiliate base, the Prosper Limited members and Ruja Ignatova decided it was time to try again, but with a fresh coat of paint. This time, they created Subway.biz. They pretty much copied everything about Bitcoin, including almost all the website code and reward tiers, and then shortly after renamed it to Onecoin. And that is how Ruja Ignatova graduated from law school to a criminal enterprise. Fresh off the collapse of Bitcoin, the facelift given to the repurposed assets was complete. Onecoin was now born into the world. Now, due to the operation of Bitcoin being marketed mostly in Asia, almost everyone had no idea what they were in for, which means they didn't need to change very much. Essentially, the Onecoin model worked like this. You became a member, and this gave you the privilege to purchase educational packages, which ranged from 100 euros to this time a staggering 225,000 euros. Each step of the way had a bonus amount of tokens that you would assign in an internal Onecoin mining operation, which would grow your investment as returns were generated as coins were mined. The kicker, of course, is that the educational material you purchased was all plagiarized, and Onecoin wasn't actually mined. It was just generated by a script at set intervals to give the illusion it was working like the Bitcoin network, which they of course claim to be competing with.
This network was created to become and to fuel the growth of Onecoin, which I strongly believe will be the #1 cryptocurrency worldwide.
Much like the predecessor, the only way to interact with Onecoin at all was via their internal exchange, which this time they called Xcoin X. Funnily enough, you couldn't even interact with this exchange even if you had Onecoin on your account, unless you had the sufficient level of starter package, creating a barrier that you needed to pay in order to overcome. And they did this at every single hurdle. Now at this point, let's talk about a Ponzi scheme, specifically how it operates and what are the conditions of failure. A Ponzi scheme exists to take in money from investors for an investment that doesn't actually exist or doesn't pay back what they say it will, hoping that new money entering will give you the liquidity to pay off any older investors that wish to exit. It's a revolving door of money, and you're hoping the people coming in are going to outpace the people going out. The longer a Ponzi scheme operates, the harder it is for them to maintain these mechanics due to a couple of facts. The first one being the business has expenses, as well as is going to most likely be siphoning off money for the creators, and doesn't generate any legit returns. All they have is the new money coming in, and that will completely be outweighed by the money they owe people based on how much the investment is supposed to be growing. Essentially, the larger the scheme becomes, the harder it becomes to maintain. You can, however, implement bottlenecks to slow down the rate at which older investors can access their money, and you can also inspire confidence in your users in a way that makes them less likely to withdraw in the first place. Take, for instance, the diamond standard of Ponzi schemes, the most famous and longest running in history, which was operated by Bernie Madoff. He operated this fraud for over 17 years and stole in the ballpark of $65 billion. The reason it operated for as long as it did was really a few reasons, but mostly confidence, a lack of scandals, and the people involved protecting him because they were also on the take. I would say the key to a good Ponzi scheme is to actually pay people money. So long as people are earning the crazy returns that you've claimed and they can touch that money in their real bank account, nobody cares if you are a fraud. The issue, of course, is when you start to miss payouts, create too many barriers to receive those payouts, or start having publications, or worse, governments call you out for fraudulent operation. That's going to start the domino effect, and it becomes a matter of time before the money coming in cannot possibly keep up with the money going out, as you will have lost confidence in some of the investors and they will pull out their money, leaving you with less in the pot and less coming in the door. Once that begins, anything you try to do to stop this process will make you look even worse and only speed up the inevitable. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at how the dominoes fell against Onecoin. After a wildly successful beginning in late 2014 and continuing success throughout 2015, they were already an incredibly successful business. However, due to the fact that they sold stolen works as a front for a pyramid scheme mixed with a Ponzi scheme, publications and governments across the globe started to pay attention very quickly. They were, of course, not quite as smart as old Bernie, they weren't as protected, and they weren't as charismatic. The beginning was Bulgaria's Financial Supervision Commission, or FSC, in September of 2015 when they issued a warning in regards to risks of new cryptocurrency. They used Onecoin as a direct example of what could be a huge risk. Following that warning, and perhaps as a way to insulate themselves from consequences in the country they were operating from as a home base, they appeared to cease operation in Bulgaria and swap wire transfers from their Bulgarian banks to banks overseas. This becomes very important later on, so remember this point. Following that, 2016 was an absolute onslaught of bad press and the true beginning of the end. Newspapers were running stories calling it a cult, with taglines that read, "virtually worthless." The Onecoin business made it onto the observation list of multiple countries like Bulgaria, Finland, Sweden, Norway and Latvia as a fraudulent operation, with some of them even undertaking prosecutions against the creators of the business this early on. The Italian antitrust authority, for example, adopted an interim injunction against the company pending an investigation, which concluded 3 months later in February 2017, concluding that they were in fact an illegal pyramid scheme, and this is the not so serious stuff. 2017 gets real bad real quick. Because of how the business operated, they even drew the attention of local police. Of course, by how the business operated, I mean how they created recruitment events across the globe and got their tentacles into gullible wannabe entrepreneurs with the promise of working for yourself and getting rich as a result.
What do you earn a year? What would you like to earn?
6 figures is good, right?
We make 35,000 a week.
Did I
So,
tell you like
we should have listened to you a long time ago. It's like, yes, if you did, you would be a multi-millionaire like me.
They would hire out hotels and convention centers with people who were Onecoin representatives, people, of course, who bought into the pyramid scheme at high-tier packages, and try to recruit as many people as possible. One such event in India was attended by undercover police in April of 2017, and they were there to judge the accusations for themselves. They wound up making 18 arrests while also seizing dozens of bank accounts that held tens of millions of dollars. In fact, the Onecoin operation in India was so prevalent they even set up a special task force to try and get the founders, who at this stage were thought to have stolen over $3 billion in just 2 years. In June of 2017, after facing 2 years of accusations and dodging territories where they'd already been declared a fraudulent business, they pulled one of the most confusing moves I think I've ever seen while investigating or chronicling these scams. Ruja Ignatova, who was still the CEO of the business, went on public record that they could not be a scam due to the fact they were licensed by the Vietnamese government and that it was legally permissible for them to use as a digital currency. That they were in fact the first cryptocurrency in the whole of Asia that was officially licensed by any government. They even showed a legal document which said as much. This was of course what the people call a lie, and yet another crime. Not only had they been stealing billions of dollars, but they were now forging official government documents. This situation is kind of like if you were to tell your friends at school that your dad owned Disneyland, while the owner of Disneyland was stood next to you listening to the conversation and hoping they just didn't tell everyone you're a liar, and your dad couldn't own Disneyland because he did. As soon as this statement went out to the public, Vietnam's Ministry of Planning and Investment, or MPI for short, issued a statement which confirmed this document was forged. A month later, Ruja Ignatova was charged in India with duping investors as part of the special investigation that had been ongoing for the last few months, though of course, this matters very little when she would never travel to India and face those charges. Now this is where things start to get really weird. On October 25th, 2017, Ruja Ignatova boarded a Ryanair flight out of Sofia, Bulgaria, which landed in Athens, Greece, and then she vanished into thin air. Before she left, she signed over the business to her brother, Konstantin Ignatova, who became CEO in her absence. This was just a couple months before law enforcement really stepped up their game and went from calling it fraud to actually looking for arrests and the cease of operation in all territories. In January 2018, a German prosecutor's office in association with Europol and Bulgarian police stormed the Bulgarian offices of Onecoin and seized all possible material evidence, as well as the servers of the business. This was the official end of Onecoin, and beyond this, arrests were made in the US, and some of the top-level employees were and are still in custody, including the new CEO and brother of the crypto queen, Konstantin Ignatova. He took a flight to Los Angeles on March 16th of 2019, and as soon as his feet touched the floor, there were officers waiting to escort him away. When in custody, he signed a plea deal acknowledging his involvement in the scheme and the frauds, and agreed to cooperate with the US government. Now again, this is where the story goes from a crypto scam that was never a cryptocurrency to something totally different. The plea deal grants him access to the US witness protection scheme, along with a new identity, and stipulates that he will cooperate with revealing activities of individuals who might use violence against him or his family. So who is that, and what does it mean? Well, this whole story goes much deeper than initial assumptions or surface level investigation. Ruja Ignatova is on Europol's most wanted list and has since been linked with funding of terrorist organizations. She has had incredibly close ties to massively wealthy and powerful entities in the Middle East, and the $4 billion amount that was stolen from investors is a literal drop in the bucket of this story. You see, in 2015, in what is quoted as a well-documented and witnessed transaction, a sheikh in the United Arab Emirates reportedly handed Ruja Ignatova 4 USB drives that contained 230,000 bitcoins, which at the time were worth around $50 million. This was a deal for the exchange of the Onecoin bank accounts, which have since been frozen, and other assets like real estate that Ruja owned in the United Arab Emirates, which were worth around $1 billion at the time of this transaction. And yes, by the way, you heard me right, that was 230,000 bitcoins, which today, even as the cryptocurrency prices have plummeted by around 69% from all-time highs, is worth over $5 billion, and at the time this was discovered, was worth over $11 billion. To this day in 2022, authorities and journalists are still discovering wealth stashed away around the globe that are registered to shell corporations set up by multiple different law offices that have worked with Onecoin and the crypto queen directly, including penthouse apartments in London worth over $12 million, and bank accounts that have been routinely seized, some with up to $500 million in them. German police are still hunting for her, with raids of multiple apartments and office buildings of her business partners in recent months as I make this video, but it seems she's truly vanished. Now, you would think it's over here, right? Well, not exactly. According to some sources, specifically in Bulgaria and parts of Asia, the Onecoin operation is still ongoing, though now using different names and seemingly without the involvement of Ruja Ignatova, although we'll get to that in a minute, or any of her family members. We, however, can't rule out some of the original Bitcoin partners who somehow managed to skate by on the charges for their involvement, as they were involved early with Onecoin. It's also possible that this is a group of scammers who, much like copycat killers, are just copying the Onecoin method of operation. And when I said Ruja hadn't been spotted and that she couldn't be involved in these scams, that came under question in late 2021 very briefly. The only evidence of her continued life was a video that released on October 18th, 2021, 3 years after her initial disappearance, and it features her sitting at an office talking to the camera about her new cryptocurrency project called One Life Earth. This video, however, is a deepfake. People are trying to bring the crypto queen out of the shadows or back from the dead to assist them in stealing yet more money. And that is most of the known story about Onecoin and Ruja Ignatova, the woman who managed to escape into the night with potentially tens of billions of dollars in ill-gotten gains. A story that needs an ending, though due to the ties with powerful people that allegedly granted her diplomatic credentials, it's unlikely we're going to get one. According to her brother's plea deal, which stipulates he would aid the government against people who seek to do him harm and his family harm, it's very possible that Ruja Ignatova made it to her destination and found herself expendable. After all, implicating powerful people in a global fraud and having access to billions of dollars in decentralized currency is as good of a reason as any to commit murder.